The ship blew apart in under 6 minutes. One moment, HMS Dasher was floating calmly off the coast of Scotland. The next, explosions ripped through her decks, flinging bodies into the sea and igniting an inferno that burned men alive. Within minutes, 379 sailors were gone. No warning, no enemy, just fire, chaos, and silence. And for 50 years, the truth stayed buried beneath the waves. It was a cold Saturday afternoon in the Firth of Clyde, March 27, 1943. The sky hung low and gray over western Scotland, the kind of overcast that blurred sea and sky into a dull wall of slate. HMS Dasher, a Royal Navy escort carrier, sat just off the coast between Ardrossan and Arran. She was one of Britain's newest carriers, converted in a rush from an American cargo ship to meet wartime demand. But by all appearances, she was doing her job. Dasher had completed a series of training runs, her crew going through exercises with aircraft launch and recovery. There were 528 men aboard, most of them young and barely trained. They were still learning the quirks of their ship, still figuring out her narrow decks and unpredictable engines. But nothing seemed especially wrong until 4:40 p.m., when an explosion ripped through the hangar deck. It was violent, instant. A roar that lifted steel from steel, flung bodies like rag dolls, and turned compartments into burning cages. A second explosion followed almost immediately, larger than the first. The entire aft section of the ship heaved, twisted, and then began to buckle. Flames shot into the sky. Smoke turned the gray horizon black. Men ran, shouted, dove for escape routes. Many never made it. In less than 6 minutes, HMS Dasher was gone. She sank just off Ardrossan, taking 379 men with her. Only 149 survived. It was one of the worst naval disasters in British home waters during the entire war, and yet almost no one heard about it. There was no announcement on the radio, no grieving families interviewed in the newspapers, no public investigation. The Ministry of Information released a carefully worded statement days later, blaming the incident on an internal explosion and offering no further details. Letters sent to families were vague, sometimes contradictory. Some received notes saying their loved one had been lost during training. Others were told only that the cause of death was unknown. The truth was buried, and it stayed that way for decades. But some people couldn't forget. Local fishermen had seen the explosion from shore. Rescue boats had been launched from Ardrossan and Arran almost immediately, but when they reached the site, the carnage was overwhelming. The water was coated with burning fuel. Survivors thrashed in oil-slicked waves. Some were on fire. Others were clinging to pieces of wreckage, many too injured or dazed to speak. And then there were the bodies, hundreds of them. Some were pulled aboard rescue boats. Others were washed ashore for days afterward, onto the beaches of Arran, over to the rocky coastline near Largs. In some places, locals were warned to stay inside. The military arrived, cordoned off sections of beach, and began retrieving remains in silence. No cameras, no public statements. They didn't even allow funerals. Families were told their sons were buried at sea. Some never received a coffin. Others got a closed casket with instructions not to open it. More than a few families questioned what had happened, but every inquiry ran into the same wall of silence. Behind that wall, the Royal Navy began its internal investigation. What they found was damning. HMS Dasher was one of several escort carriers converted from American-built merchant vessels under a lend-lease arrangement. She'd been originally laid down as the Rio de Janeiro, a cargo ship built in New Jersey. After conversion, she was recommissioned into British service in mid-1942 and rushed into training exercises soon after. But her design was flawed. The fuel systems used for aircraft on board were dangerous, especially the methods for transferring aviation gasoline. The tanks were poorly vented, and the pipes ran through hot areas of the ship. Fumes built up easily. A single spark could trigger a chain reaction. And that's likely what happened. Investigators found evidence suggesting that fuel vapors had collected on the hangar deck during refueling procedures, when an aircraft engine was started, or possibly when someone flipped an electrical switch. It ignited the gas. The blast gutted the deck and reached the storage tanks, causing the secondary explosion. But instead of releasing this conclusion publicly, the Royal Navy sealed the file. They were at war, after all. Morale was critical. The Navy couldn't afford a scandal about faulty ships, especially when those ships had come from an ally. Britain needed more escort carriers, not fewer. So the decision was made. Cover it up. Blame it on an accident. Keep the cause vague. Keep the families quiet. One of those families was the mother of 18-year-old Leonard White. Leonard had been aboard Dasher just a few weeks. He was thrilled to be in the Navy. In the last letter he sent home, he wrote that the food was better than he expected, that the weather was cold, but he was managing. Then, silence. A telegram. A vague death notice. His mother asked for details, and the Navy told her nothing. Years later, when secret records were finally unsealed, she learned the truth. Her son hadn't died quickly. He'd been pulled from the water alive, badly burned, but died in agony hours later on the rescue ship. And he wasn't alone. Some of the survivors later described hellish scenes, men on fire jumping into oil-slicked water, only to ignite again. Others told of trying to save shipmates who were trapped behind collapsed bulkheads, screaming for help as the water rushed in. One man, unable to reach his best friend through a blocked hatch, stayed beside it until the deck slipped below the surface, listening until the screams stopped. And for what? The silence around Dasher's sinking wasn't just about wartime secrecy. It became a symbol of something deeper. A choice to protect reputation over remembrance. A decision to bury truth beneath bureaucracy. Even the survivors were warned to keep quiet. Many were transferred quickly to other ships. Some were told that discussing the incident was a violation of the Official Secrets Act. A few tried to speak out anyway, but their stories were dismissed, their memories questioned. One survivor, years later, recounted how the explosion lifted him off his feet and threw him across the deck. He'd landed near the railing and tumbled into the sea. He swam until a lifeboat pulled him out. When he asked about his bunkmates, he was told, "You're the only one from that section." Decades passed. The wreck of HMS Dasher remained at the bottom of the Firth of Clyde, classified as a war grave, off limits to divers. But questions lingered. Local historians and naval researchers pushed for answers. In 1993, on the 50th anniversary of the disaster, memorials were finally erected in Ardrossan and Arran. Families gathered. Survivors spoke. For many, it was the first time they'd been able to grieve publicly. The official files were slowly declassified. They confirmed what survivors had always said. The explosions were caused by volatile fuel systems, poor design, and inadequate safety measures. A preventable disaster. And yet, even now, some details remain unclear. Why did it take 50 years for the truth to come out? Why were families misled? Why did the Royal Navy, an institution built on honor, choose silence over justice? HMS Dasher wasn't lost in battle. She wasn't sunk by enemy action. She was undone by her own design, her own systems, and the haste of a nation at war. The men who died aboard her paid for that haste with their lives. And the silence that followed was its own kind of tragedy. Today, most people have never heard of Dasher. Her name doesn't appear in history books like Ark Royal or Hood. But the sea remembers. And so do the families. A training ship, a quiet channel, a war grave few speak of. But for those who were there, and for those left behind, It was one of the worst days of the war. And it almost disappeared. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.